Hi everyone. Well, it's week number 4, and I finally got to the ocean in my walking around giving my little talks. A very specific ocean in that is the UCSB campus. Beautiful, isn't it? And I am right south of the campus. You may be aware of this little dock here. You can see it from the campus. You may have walked down toward it at some point. Hey, if you haven't, I would. It's a beautiful walk in a beautiful place here. And I just filmed another little talk here, which is right south of the campus. I talked about access to that beach. But that's not what I want to talk about now. And this is the introduction to the third quarter of Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry for the Future. So, I want to invite you to talk about 3 different things. You don't have to talk about any one of these. You could talk about one of them in detail, but I thought I'd just throw out some ideas that you may want to address. So the first is the book, The Ministry for the Future, is now into, again, it's past the second half, and we're into the third quarter. Feel free to comment on anything that you like. A lot's happening there. I don't want to be a spoiler if you're watching this before the book itself, but yeah, so feel free to address any of that. The second is that, well, we've now had Kim Stanley Robinson come and talk to the class. In some of the comments for last week, people were already taking this opportunity to roll in what he had to say into their comment. If you haven't done that already, I want to just throw out the idea that you could. So what would that mean? Well, in the most direct way, Kim Stanley Robinson, maybe somewhat surprisingly, said that, the ministry for the future, this idea of creating a ministry for the future, isn't the way to go. In other words, it's not like he's come up with the perfect equation, the perfect thing we need to do, which is create this organization. As he suggested, if you remember his talk, it's not the way to go, in the sense that UN organizations aren't that powerful, and what else he had to say. So I think that's interesting, and also I think, I don't know if backpedaling is the way to put it, but he came out somewhat surprisingly in the novel, not advocating for, but introducing, eco-terrorism as being an effective way to, for example, stop the airline industry, to stop the beef industry. But in his talk, he said, no, that's not the way that, in fact, activism is great, and he mentioned that he had been an activist, has been an activist ever since the 1960s during the Vietnam War protests. But that the cornerstone, and he actually quotes a book, or mentioned a book well worth reading, called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is about the, like the Keystone Access Pipeline and all, that the cornerstone thought should be regarding this: don't hurt anyone, period. So in the novel, where all these planes are being taken down, presumably thousands of people are dying. That is something that I wouldn't say that he regretted, but I think he realized that the cornerstone idea is, well, if you want to do violent acts, and he's not advocating them, I certainly am not advocating them, but do not do violence against people. The cornerstone is the moral precept: don't hurt anyone, ever, period. And ideally, that plays out in the form of passive resistance. But if you were going to do something like a violent act, do it against, things that would hurt the interest of the people doing it. So in other words, blow up a pipeline. Make sure no one's around, blow up the pipeline. No one gets hurt, but the economic interests are being damaged. And furthermore, if one were to keep doing it, they'd get the idea that you just couldn't put this pipeline up because someone's going to keep blowing it up, and actually it's there in the novel, if you remember, that when Mary's talking to her second in charge about black operations, that maybe they're already doing them early in the novel. That's the way it's suggested. But that it would be something like sabotage of like an oil refinery or something like that. But anyhow, so the second thought, more generally, is you could talk about Kim Stanley Robinson talking about the novel rather than just talking about the novel directly. And I think the third one is that we're in a position to, and it kind of comes off of that, to now talk about or think about this idea of imagining a future. And maybe a better way of putting it in terms of the climate crisis, because this is cli-fi, climate fiction, imagining a way out of this, you know. And I think anyone doing that is terrific. And I think in different ways we should all do that. And I think that's the big challenge right now, is to figure out a way out of this problem that we have and imagine a better future ahead. And it may well be a better future for all sorts of reasons, depending on how you imagine it, where things like racial injustice are also addressed at the same time by way of climate justice and environmental justice more generally. But I just want to throw out the idea of reflecting on the notion of using an imaginative space like a novel. It could be a film, it could be other things, but using that imaginative space to think about the future. And I think it's rather interesting that science fiction writers have done this for a long time. So Arthur C. Clarke, in the 1940s, imagined the idea of a geosynchronous satellite in orbit. What that means is if you put a satellite straight up at the right place, I think it's 22,500 miles, it would literally stay over the same spot on the planet all the time. It would, like, literally, if you could put a string from it down to me, it would always be there and it would never move. That's a fascinating idea that a science fiction writer came up with. It's actually, however, what scientists ultimately did, and it's how all communication satellites work on the planet now, or most of them for the most part, that they are up there all the time, and if you wonder how like a satellite phone or satellite TV or something works, that's it. But the point is, that wasn't figured out first by scientists. That was an imaginative leap made by a sci-fi writer, science fiction writer. So I just want to think about that, this notion of how to imagine the future. And I think Kim Stanley Robinson was very clear that he doesn't by any means think that he has figured out the best way to imagine the future or anything. But it is interesting to think about the fact that we could have more and more people doing just that. Okay, the sun is coming up here. You can probably see it on my face. It's very bright. Have a great day, and I hope you continue reading the novel. Take care.